Hello, welcome to demola, and today's lesson we're going to be talking about inheritance. Coming towards the end of the second topic, we're going to be talking about order definitions, pedigree charts, sex linkage. Let's go straight into it. Okay, so whenever we talk about inheritance, something that's really important is the definitions. And I'm not kidding when I say definitions are going to become your best friend in this topic. So we've got a couple that you need to be very aware of. A gene. Sequence of DNA bases that codes for a protein. I'm just going to highlight where you get marks. So sequence of DNA bases gets you a mark, and then also codes for a protein. Cool. Allele, different versions of a gene. That's going to mark different versions of a gene. Same gene locus point. This is going to be like a point on a chromosome. So if we draw a quick chromosome, this would be a gene locus point, yeah? Where we find a specific gene. Cool. Genotype, combination of alleles. Phenotype, visible characteristics of an organism. Just kind of rushing through because you should have seen these in GCSE anyways. Dominant allele is expressed if it's present in the genotype. These are going to be your capital letters. Whereas recessive alleles are only expressed if you have 2 copies present in the genotype. These are going to be your lowercase. Incomplete dominance might be a new term. So incomplete dominance is when you have neither allele being fully expressed. And we have an example of incomplete dominance later. Probably shouldn't have told you that. And then codominance as well is that they're expressed equally, right? Homozygous, 2 copies of the same allele. Heterozygous, 2 different alleles, and we've got examples down here. So I'm going to just highlight this as a box. You can see homozygous dominant, heterozygous, and homozygous recessive. Just rush that through because it is just definitions, but very important that you can define all these terms if they come up in an exam. Okay, so now we've got to talk about monohybrid inheritance, and all that means is that the phenotype is controlled by a single gene. Yeah, we have it, for example, in cystic fibrosis. Cool. So if we do capital F is dominant, lowercase f is recessive, our mother is a carrier, and this is how you need to structure it out whenever you're answering a question. Cool. The mother is a carrier, so her genotype must be FF, like that. And the father is affected, so it must be FF. So we've done the phenotype, and now we've done the genotype. Now we can draw our Punnett square. So I'll just write that out. Punnett square. Cool. We got the mother and the father there. It doesn't really matter which order you put it. But you can see in each of these scenarios, the offspring is going to get 1 allele from the mother and 1 from the father. So on this side, FF, FF like that. This side, FF, FF. Cool. Now, whenever you're answering these questions, I want you to write the possible genotype. So we've got 50% chance of FF, and we've also got a 50% chance of FF like this. So our possible phenotypes are now going to be that we can have 50% are unaffected. And to be honest, it depends on the question. Sometimes you'll place carriers, but normally carrier isn't really a phenotype. Yeah. So unaffected and 50% affected. So that's kind of how we do a question like that, yeah? So monohybrid inheritance controlled by 1 gene, you can easily draw a Punnett square to get the chances of the offspring happening, yeah? Having a specific disorder, yeah? Just know, this doesn't mean that 50% is always going to happen. Yeah, we could have a mother that has 3 sons and all of them don't have cystic fibrosis in this case, yeah? It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen 50% of the time, but there is a 50% probability. Something else that I think deserves its own section is sex linkages, yeah? So this is when the expression of a gene is dependent on the gender, yeah? And typically, it's because it's found on the X chromosome. So literally, if you're in an exam, you're describing sex linkage, I'm going to say it's a sex-linked gene. It's a gene that is found on the X chromosome. That's what, or a gene that's gene locus point is found on the X chromosome. I like that. A gene which its gene locus is found on the X chromosome. Cool. We all know that female is XX and male is XY. So if you have an X-linked disorder, it means that your female can be homozygous. Yeah, they can be homozygous or they can be heterozygous. Whereas the male, if they get 1 copy of the allele, they're going to have the disease. So, case in point, hemophilia. Yeah, we said that our mother is a carrier. So again, we've got the phenotype. Let's do the genotype. So X and then carrier is going to be 1 capital and 1 like that. Yeah, so we're saying it's X-linked recessive. Cool. The father's unaffected, which means he's XHY. You get what I mean? So he's unaffected. Now, let's draw out our Punnett square. So you can see here, they're going to get 1 there, 1 there, 1 here, and 1 here. So I hope that makes sense, yeah? possible genotypes are, we've got 25% XH, XH. We've got 25% XH, XH. We've got 25% XHY. And we've also got 25% of X lowercase h y. Now, we do need to think about the phenotype. Very important that you think about the phenotype, yeah? I hope we all accept that this and this are both going to be unaffected. So, I can say 100% of female offspring unaffected. I hope that makes sense, that conclusion we've drawn. And when we look at the male offspring, you can see this one's also unaffected because they don't have the bad gene, but this one does have the bad gene. And like we said, it's more likely for this to happen in a man, that the man has the disease, because the woman can be heterozygous. Yeah, the man can't be heterozygous. If they get one copy, they're done for. So if we say our phenotype here, 50% of male offspring unaffected, and we also got 50% of male offspring affected or sufferers. So I hope that also makes sense when we talk about sex linkage as well. Another concept I did want to touch on was pedigree charts. Yeah, I think they're more common to come up in SNAB, but they can come up in any exam board, right? And these are patterns of inheritance through generations, yeah? And it helps you to tell if a trait is dominant or recessive. Cool. Whenever you have a Punnett square, it's going to be almost like a tree, yeah? And you'll see that squares that are blank are unaffected males, a blank circle is an unaffected female, a filled-in square is an affected male, filled-in circle, affected female. And you can kind of see they mostly will look like this, and then maybe if someone's affected, it will be like that. You know what I mean? Now, I've said that generally, yes, you follow these patterns, but if the question tells you a different key, use the key from the question. Now, the main things that you see is autosomal recessive, and let's just tell you what an autosome is. An autosome is a non-sex chromosome. Yeah, so all the other 23 chromosomes are going to be autosomes. Yeah, except for that 23rd, which is the sex chromosome. Now, you can see this pattern, we'll call this pattern autosomal recessive. Why? Typically, when you have an autosomal recessive pedigree chart, it skips generations. You have two unaffected parents can have an affected child, and two affected parents will definitely have an affected child. So if you look here, we've got this lot here. Both parents are affected, so that means that we have an affected child. And I hope that I explained this clearly, but you can see here, these are the two parents. So if I just put dots, those are two parents, and then everything that comes from that connection here, these are all of the offspring. And then, for example, this person I've put next to, that's someone who's married into the family. Yeah, cool. We've also got an example here where we've got an affected person marrying. Oh, and even let's just go with this one, it's a bit easier. You can see here at the top the two people in the first generation. So this first, second, third generation. So the two people in the first generation, none of them are affected, but they can pass on to their children. Yeah, so they must have both been heterozygous. Hope that makes sense. And when we talk about autosomal dominant, what you'll see is it rarely skips generations. It's a bit harder to spot, but you will see that ideally a lot more people should have the disorder. Yeah, and then if you've got two parents that none of them have it, then none of their children should ever get the disease. Yeah, so that is something that you should know about autosomal dominant. But yeah, a bit harder to spot. Now, when you see this pedigree chart, I think first thing to note is that only males are affected. Yeah, this one is more of a case of X-linked recessive, right? So males being affected more than women is definitely number one telltale sign that this might be X-linked recessive. Yeah, but what you should also be able to tell is that sometimes an affected mother will pass it on. If we had an affected mother in this situation, she will pass that on to our child. Yeah, so she'll pass it on to any male offspring if they are an affected mother. Cool. And you'll see that the fathers don't pass it on to their children. Cool. That's actually recessive. If you look here, we've got a lot more, and we've got this one being Y-linked. Yeah. So in Y-linked, any male offspring will have the disorder. As you see, one gives it to 4. Also gives it to 8. 4, both of their children are guys. 10 and 11 both have it. 8, 15 has it. Yeah, but all the women, none of them have the disease because they cannot get a Y chromosome from their father. I hope that makes sense. And something else that I like to add that we don't have here because it doesn't really come up in A level. But if you ever got a mitochondrial disease is only passed on from the mother to the child. But that can be both male and female children. But it will be from the mother that they pass on to their child. Yeah? I hope that makes sense as well. Okay, so now we have our questions. So I'm gonna give a bit of time for you to like pause for these questions, yeah? We've got the first one that you're determining the probability that person 2 has the same sex and phenotype as person 1. Second question, we've got sickle cell anemia. You're defining a gene, then you are drawing a Punnett square as well. Finally, we've got this question here where we need to explain type of inheritance and also give the probability that the next offspring are also Roan. So we'll zoom out, but I hope you've had time to pause on each of them. All right, have a go at those questions, please. Okay, so looking at the first question, first of all, every single time, 50% chance of being male or female. Yeah. So in this question, it was a female. Yeah. So 50%. Cool. We can also tell that person 1 is heterozygous. Why? Because if you can see person 1 and the person that the father, right, you can see that both of them are unaffected, but they've got a child here that's affected. So this must be 2 homozygous people that had a child that was homozygous recessive. Yeah. So both of them are heterozygous. Cool. We now were asked though the chance of them having the same phenotype, not genotype. So when we draw a Punnett square to the side, you can see that we're using both the probabilities that have unaffected and 75% chance. So if you do 0.75 times a 0.5, you get your answer of 0.375. Cool. Next thing, definition again, and I've told you why you're getting the marks for this. Sequence of bases in DNA or sequence of DNA bases, fine. And then coding for a protein. Yeah? Those are what's going to get you the marks in that definition of a gene. Now, that diagram again, you guys need to be able to do these. So I forgot what I gave you in the question. But it's a 2 parents are heterozygous. So pretty much that Punnett square that we've done up here, but just for this scenario, yeah? So you can see those are your probabilities, yeah? And then it asked you about the chance that they're homozygous for the mutated allele, which would be 0.25 or 25%. Incomplete dominance. So if you look here in this question, you can see that there's the white spots, right? But you can tell that it's not equal to the pure red. Yeah. So we have more red than white. So it's not that they're co-dominant. Although it's allowed it in this question, they're not co-dominant because they're not expressed equally. They're still more red. But because we are expressing some white as well, we consider that it's incomplete dominance. It's not fully overshadowing the white. Yeah. And next question, B. So if you then draw out your Punnett square again. Okay, and we have to draw another quick Punnett square here, but the only chance of you getting all those different genotypes is if both parents were heterozygous. Yeah, so you can see when both parents are heterozygous, we've got WW, RR, and RW. Yeah, and we do 50% because 50% chance of being RW, which would give you that row in color. Hope that makes sense. Okay, and for now, that should wrap up inheritance. So A-star tips, obviously, remember the definitions. You do get a lot of marks for them, especially like gene, allele, you know, the ones that I highlighted. Make sure you can define those. Yeah. Familiar yourself with analyzing pedigree charts as well, because they can be a bit confusing. What do you not do? Prior knowledge of conditions. So like, for example, I know cystic fibrosis is homozygous recessive, and ideally if it comes in the exam, they'll say it's homozygous recessive. But if in the exam they said it was homozygous dominant, I need to go by what they say in the exam. Yeah. So don't use your prior knowledge. Also, don't skip steps when you're drawing your Punnett squares. Yeah. Very, very easy to do. But if you got a question with higher marks, then they'd want to see that whole process. Yeah. And in confusing incomplete dominance with codominance, I don't really like that the question said that you can use both. They are different things, so make sure that you do know the difference. With incomplete dominance being that your dominant allele isn't fully expressed, and codominance being that both alleles are expressed equally. So I hope that lesson on inheritance was good. it's more of a setup so that we can actually start talking about cystic fibrosis, which is the main thing about this topic too. Hope it was helpful. Any questions below, drop them in the comments. I'm gonna do my best to answer. Also, if the video was useful, please drop a like, subscribe. We'd really, really appreciate it. We've got we've got the Instagram and the TikTok at demola, but I'll catch you in the next one. Bye for now.